What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the video, and today I'll be showing you how you can host your relational database using AWS Web Services. First, we're going to look at some important terminology about the web services that we'll be covering in this video. Starting with the VPC service, the Virtual Private Cloud. When you deploy an EC2 instance, it needs to be part of a virtual network on the cloud. This virtual network in AWS is known as a Virtual Private Cloud. Within a VPC, you also have subnets or subnetworks. This is a range of IP addresses in the VPC. This is an isolated network on the AWS cloud. All VPCs are isolated from one another. A VPC is launched in a region. It also has a CIDR block configured. Next, we're going to be looking at the RDS service. This is the Amazon Relational Database service. This service makes it easier to set up a database on the AWS cloud. Now, you could manually spin up an EC2 instance and configure the database software on that instance. But keep in mind, you will have to manage backups and the software patching all on your own as the database administrator. But the Relational Database service handles all of this for you. The supported database engines of the RDS service is MySQL, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres, and MariaDB. There is high availability built into the service. It manages backups, software patching, failure detection for you. The entire infrastructure is entirely managed by AWS. We are going to start off by going to the AWS Management Console and then going to the RDS service. Here you can see all of your resources related to the RDS service. We are going to click on the databases and then we're going to create a database. You can choose Standard Create. For this video, we will be choosing MySQL Server as the database engine. It also has support for DB2 that isn't listed in my PowerPoint. Next, we're just going to use the Amazon RDS as the database management type, and then with the SQL Server Express edition. For the engine version, you can just default to the latest SQL Server version. Then we're going to be using the free tier template. Then the DB instance identifier is the name that you want to get for your RDS service instance. So we can do DB SQL Server 01 as the name. Then the credential settings is the credentials that you will later be using to log into your database. So the master username, we will just be keeping that as admin, and then we can make it self-managed. We are just going to quickly enter a password on our own. You need to remember this password for when we will be logging in later to the RDS service. Here you choose a DB instance class. So with default for the free tier template, we get a T3.micro, which has 2 CPUs, 1 GB of RAM on a 2085 megabytes per second line. For storage, we will be choosing general purpose SSD storage with 20 gigabytes allocated. And then we do not want to connect an EC2 instance. For the VPC, you just want to select Create New VPC so that it creates a VPC with all of the necessary configurations already in place for you. Then create new DB subnet group, and then public access, we're going to say yes, because if we do not say yes here, you can only connect to the DB using other AWS services, for example, like your EC2 service. But we want to connect via SQL Server Management Studio, so we're going to select yes. And then we're just going to create a new, or you can choose an existing VPC with the default security group. No preference for the availability zone, and then there's just the default certificate authority. Then leave everything else as it is and click Create Database. The database creation will take a while, so we can get back once the database has completed. Alright, after your RDS service has been finished setting up and the status is available, you can go ahead and click on the instance. Here you can see a summary of the details of the instance. Here the summary above indicates the DB identifier as well as the status, as well as more important information like the engine, which is SQL Server Express Edition, and the region. In terms of networking, here we have the availability zone, the VPC, which we'll quickly be checking out. So you can quickly just click on the VPC that you have and go to resource map. So here you can see that in this VPC we have 3 subnets, each in different locations, EU North 1A, 1B, and 1C, and they are all connected to a internet gateway through a route table. So if your VPC does not look like this, just make sure that it does. Let's go back to the RDS dashboard. Then in terms of the endpoint and port, this endpoint is what we will be using as a connection string to connect to our database. Here in port, this is the default port for SQL Server Express. And then in terms of security, here we have a publicly accessible DB instance with the VPC security group. Now we quickly need to edit the security group to allow for incoming traffic on the SQL Server port, which is 1433. So just clicking on the security group that we have, going to edit inbound rules. Here you can see edit inbound and edit outbound rules. So inbound rules is traffic going into the network or into the instance, and outbound rules is traffic going out of the network. So go into inbound rules, you can click on edit inbound rules. Then you can just click on here, add rule, and you can scroll down all the way to where it says Microsoft SQL. And it should automatically populate the protocol for TCP, the transmission control protocol, and then the port 1433, which is the same port that we have over here. Then we need to specify a CIDR block. So for this moment, you can just click this block, and then you can say save rules. Then we can go back to the RDS dashboard and copy the endpoint. Then you can open up your Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, click on Connect, click on Database Engine. Now here we are going to copy the endpoint of the engine. We can specify SQL Server Connect. Make sure that encryption is optional and that you trust the server certificate. This login is the same login that we created when we created the DB instance. Then you can just specify the password that you created. And then you can say remember password and connect. And as you can see, we have successfully connected to the database, and you can create tables, and the database is hosted. That is all for this video. I've showed you everything you need to know about deploying a relational database service on AWS using the RDS service. Thank you everyone for watching, and like and subscribe.